Education is the passport to the future, a quote by Malcolm X. Without education, finding a path, employment, or even a livelihood is nearly impossible. But what if you don't have a job, you don't have an education, and you don't even have a passport? Hey everyone, we are Team WX from Singapore. I am Wenxuan.
And I am Xin Yue, and we are two best friends united by our passion for education and human rights. We've chosen to focus on SDG Goal Force Target 4.4.
Of course, universal education and employment by 2030 seems literally impossible. But hear me out. Our research reveals that unemployment and lack of education largely affects vulnerable populations of forced displacement. Take a look at our research here.
UNHCR data states refugees' higher education rate is just 7%, well below the 42% global average, with most stateless and displaced people having no education rights at all. The European Commission states that vulnerable groups have an overall average employment rate of 56%, with those employed earning meager salaries unable to support themselves.
Moreover, vulnerable groups face three key issues: lack of rights, basic services, and legal protection, leading to limited social mobility, skill gaps, and extreme poverty. Our mission is to find a sustainable solution for their education and employment.
But first, we must analyze current solutions and why they are not working. Firstly, the UN provides humanitarian assistance and basic needs aids like food, shelter, healthcare, and education in conflict zones, along with water and sanitation, but face sustainability issues like manpower shortages, costly aid theft, and lack of support for independence. Without diplomas or jobs, people can't rebuild their lives.
Secondly, countries can adopt displaced population in national plans for legal protection, working rights, and education, yet its implementation is hindered by citizens fearing job loss and more crime. After all, governments are to prioritize their citizens first.
Therefore, current solutions are unsustainable or poorly implemented, leaving little done to help vulnerable groups without education or jobs. Research shows education and employment alone aren't enough. People need basic rights and safety first. This led us to ask, what if a solution benefited both host countries and vulnerable groups? What if a solution provided vulnerable groups with education, skills, and employment? What if a solution allowed vulnerable groups to live a normal life like you and me?
Introducing temporary resident citizenship, where all benefits.
Oh, Wenxuan, tell me, how does it work?
Firstly, our solution, temporary resident citizenship, grants vulnerable groups 10 years residency with legal protection, rights, and services like education and healthcare. It includes criteria to be met to continue living there after 10 years and is limited to frontline employment.
Wow, that sounds amazing. But what exactly happens during each year?
Under the temporary resident citizenship, adults receive subsidized taxes during the first year, while studying the local language, requiring to pass an end-of-year exams to advance. They'll serve 3 years of national service, earning income, and receive rental housing.
In year 2, subsidized taxes remain as they continue national service. After learning the local language, they can pursue skills through government or UNHCR programs for a diploma in 2 to 3 years. During year 3, taxes are no longer subsidized and non-residential rates apply during their last year of national service as they begin their chosen education path through the same programs.
In year 4 and 5, individuals complete education, enter workforce, and pay non-residential rates. In year 6 onwards, focuses on individuals meeting the 10 years criteria with an 8th year check to see if they are on track, offering support like tutoring for children not doing well in school if needed. Lastly, in the 10th year, those meeting the criteria may remain in the country. Speaking of criteria, what are they?
Well, Wenxuan, good that you asked. The criteria: 400 volunteer hours, GDP-based sufficient stable income, minimum working hours, children keeping up with education, and employer recommendations are necessary for 3 main reasons: ensuring societal contribution, maintaining living standards, and enabling a chance to bounce back. Of course, while host countries adjust criteria leniency, the criteria must remain structured and achievable.
What about the children?
In the first year, children learn the local language and take an educational test to find their level, then enter appropriate public school grades in the second year based on results.
Now I'm curious, what happens after 10 years?
Temporary residents meeting criteria remain temporary residents. For children, those born after a temporary resident meets criteria receive first-class citizenship of host country at 18, plus applying for citizenship of their home country, while those born before their parents meet criteria will remain temporary residents and seek home country citizenship. On the other hand, temporary residents failing to meet criteria must resettle in another host country's 10 years criteria, or choose to go to UNHCR shelters for additional education to better contribute for the next host country and prevent them from going stateless.
But what if the war ends in temporary residents' home country while they're still under the 10 years temporary resident citizenship?
In this case, temporary residents are to return to their home country in 18 months, unless offered to stay in the host country as the government views them as foreign talent, though the final decision is still the temporary residents to make.
One more question. Who will the host countries be?
Well, Wenxuan, host countries are those willing to take in vulnerable groups and want a long-term solution to provide everyone with a right to education and employment. Currently, over 120 countries host vulnerable groups. Countries who do not have the resources to host but support the idea of this long-term solution can contribute funds through the UNHCR or other UN councils. Currently, 40 to 50 countries support host countries through financial aid. For example, Singapore recently donated $18 million in humanitarian aid to Gaza. A survey we conducted also shows only 30.8% initially supported accepting vulnerable groups in their country. But after showing our solution, a whopping 95.2% of respondents support these ideas in implementation.
Moving on, let's find out the benefits of temporary resident citizenship. Starting with long-term benefits for vulnerable groups, temporary resident citizenship provides rights, protection, and services. Additionally, access to jobs and education helps them support themselves, avoid crime, and achieve social mobility. Moving on to host countries, they will garner a larger pool of talent with reduced crimes from vulnerable groups, increased manpower in frontline jobs, and overall lower support costs. Globally, temporary resident citizenship fosters self-reliance in vulnerable groups, provides economic growth, and strengthens frontline, reducing the risk of future conflicts in host countries. In short, this solution not only provides vulnerable groups with education and employment, but also benefits all countries involved.
Well, with that said, you may have some concerns about our solution. Fear not, we'll cover them right now. First, regarding inflation, based on Forbes, economists suggest one of the best ways to reduce it is to increase immigration, which can be done by expanding legal channels for temporary workers, including temporary residents. In addition, host countries control the number of people from vulnerable groups they accept to avoid hyperinflation. Second, concerns about job competition are addressed by limiting temporary residents to frontline jobs, which are in high demand. Studies like the Borgen Project show it is a misassumption that refugees are stealing host countries' jobs. Instead, refugees have little impact on the job market and in fact offer an economic boost.
The concerns of strains on host country resources are addressed by allowing temporary residents to work, solving the issue many countries face as only those with citizenship and visa can work, causing people from vulnerable groups to rely solely on humanitarian aid. Host countries control the number of people they decide to accept to avoid overcrowding. Fourth, regarding not adding value to host countries, temporary residents are limited to frontline jobs, which strengthens host countries' frontlines. They also must participate in volunteer work to contribute to society. Research shows that initial investment pays off as refugees become established and boost the economy.
Lastly, concerns about increased crime rates arise when vulnerable groups lack jobs and income to support their living. Temporary resident citizenship provides jobs, housing, and subsidized bills for the first 2 years to help them adapt. In the criteria, temporary residents must have a stable income to remain after 10 years, preventing those unable to support themselves from staying and possibly engaging in crimes.
Now let's move on to our goals. Firstly, by 2025, we aim to establish a basic curriculum and mentorship for temporary residents. By 2027, we aim for 75% of vulnerable groups to have temporary resident citizenship under their host countries, taking into account, based on UNHCR, 71% of vulnerable groups are currently hosted. By 2030, at least 75% of adult temporary residents will be fully trained for frontline jobs, helping more than 50% of adults in vulnerable groups find a job and support their families, and enabling millions of children to access education. That is almost 85 million people. 85 million people who are educated, employed, and self-equipped with a brighter future.
Of course, there are limitations. Due to time constraints, the surveys do not represent a global perspective, as most respondents are students and Singaporean citizens. While currently focused on vulnerable groups' employment and education gaps, this project has the potential to help anyone lacking technical skills or education with minor adjustments. For now, we believe temporary resident citizenship will provide vulnerable groups with education, skills, and employment opportunities, offering a sustainable, practical solution for the future.
So if you are asking, should temporary resident citizenship be implemented, the answer is...
Yes!
Thank you!